Okay, over to Kayla.
Thank you, Danielle.
I'm going to sit down, which is not quite my norm, so bear with me. We have a delightful full audience and an equivalent number of participants online, which is wonderful. Perfect. Have my timer going. All right, so thank you, Danielle. Thank you to the center. Thank you to Pat and John. What started this conversation is this focus around young people and thinking of the question, why in the heart of a global pandemic would young people apply to participate in a program? I'll get into the specifics in the next slide or two of explicitly what program I'm talking about. This presentation is centered around a very specific moment in time and a particular audience at hand. But the broader question still remains, why would somebody choose to do something additional at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic when everything just seemed to explode and continued to explode? So it was a really curious question to me, and I wanted to see what motivated people. So the program at hand, this moment in time, is centered around the Youth as Researchers program, which got started by Pat Dolan and by Danielle Kennan in 2015, and is centered around young people. So we started UNESCO Chair's Youth Development Program. It's got two kind of focal points to it, where you're both elevating youth voice, so you understand more about what young people are interested in and the challenges they see and the solutions they come up with, but you're also starting to get a better grasp of how can their lived experiences count as real world data to create a larger change. So Youth as Researchers program started by our UNESCO chairs. The other note with that is that it's got a really nice connection point that extends beyond Ireland, beyond the United States. It deals with youth, and in the context of this program, and I'll specify more here in a minute, youth count as aged 14 to 35 years. Typically with the program, you get young people into groups of 4 to 8 people. You'll recall from your own kind of teamwork experiences that when you start to extend to 10 or 15 people, it's a mess of logistics to work through. So you start with a small group of people and figuring out how to engage them. We then come in and give them a crash course in social science research methods. It's a kind of, I think of it as a buffet of methods. Here are all kinds of different options. And then it's a youth-led program. So the youth are determining every aspect. They're determining what they want to see changed, how they would want to go about seeing it changed. With our crash course in research methods, they come up with the question, with the methods. They look and see what is the problem at hand and how could it be addressed. When you're thinking about collecting evidence and collecting data, they develop or utilize other instruments to collect that data, determine what the best population is, the logistics of it all. Everything is youth-led. Does that mean we have the best research projects that money can buy? No, you usually don't tend to have the most profound research projects. What you do have, though, is a group of young people collectively working together to resolve a challenge that they have uniquely identified based on their lived experiences. And it's being combined with this, with research methods and coming from a university setting and really able to kind of expand on what they can do with that data. So they go through all of these stages. You'll have a technical person such as myself or Danielle there to help guide in some technical questions, but the rest of it is youth-led. They then analyze the data, create a typically boring but very important report, and then they're going to disseminate that information in a format that they see fit. Typically that format comes in the version of some sort of visual, perhaps a video, perhaps it's just audio, but it's something that somebody would actually want to pay attention to. And that's going to be really important when, again, you're thinking about youth voice and ownership over a problem, as well as a unique way for policy or other authority figures to really engage within the topic itself. So this is the program. It's the programmatic setting of where this entire project and this presentation is coming from. Ultimately, you're trying to share evidence-based results with an authority figure. Sometimes that's a policymaker. Sometimes it's just the principal or whoever the leader of an organization might be. And ultimately, you're trying to create a broader change. It's easy to ignore someone when society considers you to be young and dumb. It's a lot harder when you've got evidence to help back that up. So that's kind of the broad concept of the program itself. So I'm not going to dive into some too specifics, but I have a couple of videos that are available on the presentation and folks can have access to these afterwards. But you have a youth project that was led in Ireland, centered around perceptions on homelessness, one conducted in the United States, centered around racial disparities, And the one that this particular presentation is centered on is a global project that looked at youth perceptions of the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are some of the outputs, some of that dissemination product that came from the different projects that have existed over the past close to 10 years now. All right, so this is the academic part. You're gonna have to bear with me as we get our way through some of the academics. So I was interested in this question of what motivates young people. One of a prominent motivational theories is self-determination theory, and it centers around internal motivation. So when someone's not paying you, they're not giving you dessert or any sort of meal or anything like that, you don't get something from it. You intrinsically want to do it. A theory to help understand why people would want to do that is self-determination theory. SDT centers around three concepts: autonomy, relatedness, and competency. Autonomy is a sense of initiative and ownership in one's actions. Relatedness is a sense of belonging and connection. And competency is a feeling of mastery, the sense that you can do something. This all sits in that internal and an intrinsic motivation, why somebody would choose to do something. If you break it down into layman's terms, you want to have ownership over your choices, you want to have friends, and you want to believe in your abilities. You want to believe that you can do something. If you have these structural elements in place, you are much more likely to have somebody who wants to do something. SDT is a common theory for the past, I think, close to 30 years at this point, that's been utilized in formal education in K through 12. So it's not uncommon, it's just uncommon to see it applied to informal education, such as the Youth as Researchers program, which students are, anybody who participates, you don't get academic credit. We don't typically have a way to pay participants. It's something that they choose to do on their own. The other piece that I want to look at was empathy. COVID-19, when this project started, the COVID-19 pandemic was in its earlier stages. There was a lot of fear, there was a lot of concern, and there was a lot of chaos that existed. Empathy felt like this really strong proponent of why somebody might choose to engage in something at a time like that. So when I was looking at the Youth Researchers Project as a whole, I wanted to look at these intrinsic motivations based off of an academic theory, and I wanted to see how empathy could play into something. So empathy is the ability to experience and understand what others feel without confusing them within how you might relate to something. For the purposes of this project, we looked at two components of empathy. First is perspective taking. Tendency to spontaneously adopt psychological point of view of others. So you're thinking about what somebody else might think about. The other key component is empathetic concern. It assesses and other-oriented feelings of empathy and concern for the unfortunate of others. So you're having an affective and a cognitive association to what somebody is experiencing. And if you go back in time to the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, you're going to have a lot of confusion happening both within your heart and within your head about what your world is and what is happening around the world to different people. So these were two components looking into this Youth Researchers program. So study details. The Youth Researchers program, we're going to dive through these. It started in the spring, it started in the fall of 2020 with data collection happening into the spring of 2021. The particular study participants were individuals who applied to participate in this global COVID-19 Youth as Researchers program. So in total, we had 5,581 applicants, and that created my sample pool. We had this large number of people who were wildly interested in joining onto this program, and it happened right around that tail end of the first year of the pandemic. The age range is going to be those that are 18 to 35. We started with 18 to ensure that we were working with at least legally considered adults. And then depending on where you are in the world, someone who is considered a youth or a young person can go all the way up to 40, depending if you're an African nation, all the way down to 18, depending on where else you might be, or 14, oftentimes within different programs. So for the purposes of this project, we kept within the boundaries, kind of combining a UNESCO defined youth as well as being open to broader countries' perspective, aged 18 to 35. Home countries, this part blew my mind. We had over 5,500 participants who applied, and they came from 90 different countries. If you were able to speak English or French, you were able to have and had internet access. you were able to then apply to the program, which is really, it was just fascinating and really inspiring to see people who were interested. The time frame that the applicants were open was about 3 weeks. So in 3 weeks' time, just using a Qualtrics program, we had a massive response. And ultimately, I submitted a survey through Qualtrics, and that's how data was collected. The instrument itself was developed by myself, including a couple of different measures. You'll have seen reference to Ryan and Desi, and they certainly came up with some, as well as Davis for our empathy, and there were other measures that were reviewed by a variety of folks. So that's the technical, that's the technical data associated with this study. Our results. So we had 5,581 people apply. That's how many people received the survey. Just under 2,000, so 1,953, a 35% response rate, which is actually a pretty good response rate, understanding what a population is looking at. Age range, we broke them down into kind of these different categories. We had a predominant 44% going from age 18 to 24, which is useful to note because it's a more classic understanding of youth. And you can see the breakdowns all the way up to age 36. We went up to 36 because by the course of the program, people continued to age. And so we allowed them to get to age 36 and wanted to take note of that. Gender, we had a slight lean towards female respondents, but ultimately it was pretty well represented. Regions, 73 countries out of the 90 that were first represented replied. And you can see the breakdown here. What I love about this breakdown is that if you were to take a look at how many people exist in these different continents and nations and areas across the world, the breakdown is pretty similar. We have not quite full representation across the board. It's not quite representative, and I would never dare to say I have a global representative, but we do have a really strong perception of what different spaces and areas across the world are understanding, which is just, it's really neat to see that this can happen over the course and during a pandemic as well. It's really cool to see. This is a terrifying looking slide. I only have it up here to indicate that we ran the math. I did do a regression, specifically taking a look at our self-determination theory and empathy. Each of these lines here represent a different measure, and we were seeing how they all combined in what was proving to be statistically significant. So the data portion of why you're here and what we're talking about. Self-determination theory was broken into autonomy, relatedness, and competency. None of the individual items from relatedness nor relatedness as a whole ended up being statistically significant, being related to someone's personal motivation to join the program. But we did have individual items from autonomy and from competency. So the items in the survey from autonomy are really centered around what happens in someone's daily life. And then competency, we have two negatives here. I don't feel very competent. I don't feel capable. And then you also have a sense of accomplishment and what somebody might do. These were the individual items that really help understand why somebody is related to personal motivation. Particularly here, while I'm here, empathy came up. And you'll notice that there's a lot of empathy items. When we split them into both perspective taking and empathetic concern, you see almost a 50-50 split between them. But you're seeing several different types of empathy items that are related to why somebody would choose to engage in this particular project, which helps tell us, we'll get to the understanding of this here in a minute, but helps us tell us that people were interested and wanted to connect to other people while they were engaged in this program. And that's one of the pieces that helped engage them in it to begin with. So breaking that down as to why it is you're actually here now. Autonomy. We want to think about ways that we can provide youth who are, again, within our age range of 18 to 35, real authentic choice in the particular program, whatever program that you're interested in engaging them in, authentic choice based on what they would actually want to do. That becomes really hard when you're running a program and you've got a million different logistics to engage with, or you've got funders that you have to meet requirements to. But if you're able to create an authentic choice for them, the chances of someone being personally motivated to join go up. Competency. You want to create moments where youth can feel competent in the sense of accomplishments with the activities that they actually participate in. It's not so much that they have to end the day having become a master of a set of skills, but being able to the end of the day having a belief that they could become a master, Having one person, having one program leader that actually believes you have the capacity to do something can be a really strong motivator. You also want to emphasize elements of constructive feedback. Youth are very aware when they mess up with something, right? We all know when we're not good at something. Imposter syndrome rises its head and we get very, very concerned about what everyone else thinks. So we're aware of that piece. But if you offer authentic and kind constructive feedback, the capacity for somebody to believe that they can get better, you believe them and that they can get better. Their chance of increasing competency and ultimately being more motivated to join a program also can increase. Empathy, perspective taking. We want to create a safe and welcoming space for youth to share their stories, and then that can guide to promoting activities that allow for discussion on what life is like for somebody else. We're aware, particularly if you're going to engage in a program of the nature of this COVID-19 Youth as Researchers program, you're aware that life exists differently for someone else. Creating space where someone can actually share that, and then allowing those conversations to take hold and allowing them to flow the way that youth choose to have them flow, versus a set of questionnaires that everyone's answering and working their way through. Empathetic concern, you're creating programmatic space where participants can embrace and then process their emotions. Right? Engaging in something, it's at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, emotions were high everywhere, and creating a space for youth to freely express them without having to worry about what somebody else might be thinking about it, whether that somebody else is a sibling, a parent, or perhaps someone with a school authority attached to them. It's going to be really important for those emotions to kind of spread and share within themselves. Oh, I'm flying through this.
That's great.
All right. So we'll keep going with some reflexive questions. So I think it's most useful when thinking of a talk like this, of how this concept of everything that I've worked on with our team can relate to something that you yourselves are doing. So if we think about a couple of these different components, autonomy, if you provide youth the opportunity to have real authentic choice, what does that mean? What does it mean to have authentic choice? What is an informal program, activity, class experience that you're engaging in? What are the different types of options you're presenting? Perhaps are you presenting too many options? We might come up with, then we have the counter narrative of kind of choice paralysis, where you feel like you can't extend any further. And then what does authentic choice look like within each of those different scenarios? These are things we might come back to at the end, and I'll find a way, we'll engage our chat and our Q&A. But I want to go through kind of each of these different segments. And these are ultimately questions that I think are really relevant for folks to think about within your own programming and how you're engaging with people. Relatedness. So relatedness didn't show up as far as being a statistically significant factor in people's personal motivation, but we all like friends. We all like being connected. It does exist within the theory as a whole. And when we engaged in various focus groups and other conversations with youth who participated in the program, some of the things that they genuinely really appreciated was being able to engage with other like-minded peers. If you're thinking about any time, particularly within that challenging age range of 18 to 24, 18 to 35, you're trying to connect with people in a lot of different ways. And it's very hard to connect with them on a real issue without kind of getting depressed about it and without feeling kind of the world hovering above you. So being able to have genuine conversations where you're looking for solutions and you're actively engaged in something created a welcoming space for folks. So while it didn't show up within our statistics as being relevant, it certainly came up in conversations. Within yourself, what are different ways that you're fostering a sense of belonging, kind of ownership within the program settings? So part of the culture, does it feel hard to do? Changing culture and challenging culture can be incredibly hard. It usually takes a long time, and there are systematic ways to go about doing it. But ultimately, if you're creating a space where folks feel a sense of belonging, they'll really be able to engage and want to be there. Competency. I love this one because it's not about making sure you have a strong skill. It's about making sure you have the belief that you could have a strong skill. So you're creating moments where youth can feel competent, a sense of accomplishment. You're emphasizing our constructive feedback. So do you believe in your participants? Is it a real, honest belief, or are you saying it because you're supposed to say it? If you're saying it because you're supposed to, there's probably something to work through there and you want to think about. But really think about, what can somebody actually do? What can they actually achieve? And do you believe them in it? Our youth are soaking up information all around us, even throughout our 20s. We're constantly looking around and absorbing information that's being given to us. We receive feedback in every way. If somebody is inauthentic in their belief in you, you're going to know it. You're aware of it. So what do you actually believe as being truth that somebody can do? What can they accomplish? And if not, why not? Perhaps addressing that again in a constructive manner. Empathy. So within our perspective taking, do you build in space for participants to be honest with each other? When we're creating space, sometimes it's a literal space. Having a set of circular tables versus a long line of tables creates a physical space where people do or don't connect. But it's also going to be kind of this theoretical space, a conversational space. Are people allowed to say what they want to say and be honest with it without having verbal and nonverbal cues kind of pushing and challenging that narrative? Do participants get to share stories or try on other perspectives? Sometimes it's going to be as simple as having a prompt and allowing conversation to occur. Other times it might come to actually giving people different labels and saying, here, try this on for 5 minutes. See how it works. See what it feels like to be the CEO. See what it feels like to be the bad guy in this conversation. What does that narrative suggest to you, and how can you really expand on it? Empathetic concern, again, you're creating that space for emotions and the ability to process those emotions. So life's hard, processing emotions is hard, but when you're able to do that, it can really create a big change in how someone's able to engage with you. So how can you achieve programmatic goals while still supporting participants' emotions? That's a really challenging fine line that some communities and some programs feel comfortable with, because you're engaging in things that oftentimes you haven't been trained on how to engage with. But if you're able to do it in a space where all parties and all stakeholders feel comfortable, you're able to create a space where kind of vulnerability and authenticity coexist together. All right, I again flew through it, but hopefully this allows space for a lot of really good conversation. And I'll let Danielle guide me.
So thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now. So for those of you who may be watching this later, please do be in contact with Kayla and I directly if you have any questions. But